I'm gonna start.
Okay, get it going.
Okay. We ready?
Yeah, just start talking.
Okay.
What you want to do.
All right. So to mount the device, there's really helpful magnets on the back. Then you can just mount it on pretty much any metal or like iron surface. And so this is a pretty good spot. It's away from anything that's going to cause it to get damaged, and it's, then we don't have to like actually screw into this. So this should be a really good mounting location, and it should be able to still get GPS as well as cellular signal. So and it just makes the mounting process a little bit easier. The next step is mounting the wire harness, and so then it just threads into the bottom of the device, and it's going to be the left port on the device. So you take the cap out, you take this, and then you thread it in, and you're set. Then we can mount the power cable, and it will connect to one of the 4 ports on the wire harness. And it's hard to mistake as it's the only port with 2 prongs. The other 2, so it won't plug into anything else other than the power connector. So then we can route the cable. And then I'm going to get some ring terminals, and then I'm going to crimp the ring terminals on here and then attach it to the battery right here. All right, so now our power cable has been routed, and we'll take care of the actual cleanup of the cables when we're done with everything else. So next is mounting the pressure sensor, and I pulled the old pressure sensor out of the old port, and I'm going to put in a T and then mount our pressure transducer and the old pressure gauge in place instead of the we just had the pressure sensor before. So I'm just putting a little Teflon tape on the threads, which is a pipe thread sealer. So pipe threads are tapered threads, and so they're cut at an angle. So then when you tighten them in, it just gets tighter, but water could still leak out. And so by putting Teflon tape or like thread sealer, it seals it up, and you don't have to get them as tight. Great. All right, so we're all finished up. They can still see their pressure gauge from the side, a little bit of an angle, but and then our pressure transducer is installed, and so now I'll plug in the cable and route the pressure sensor cable. The pressure sensor cable looks the same as the hall sensor cable, like in terms of the ends, but they're different. So make sure that you're using the one that is labeled pressure sensor for connecting to the pressure. And then it just easily connects onto the back of the pressure sensor and threads into place.
Like a couple hours.
I'm gonna route the cable as best you know how. We'll clean it up in a bit later, but route it as best we can. And then up to you, you can choose to plug it into sensor port 1 or sensor port 2. It doesn't matter. You'll configure it later in the app. So yeah, you can see here it's pressure sensor 1, your sensor port 1, and it's the pressure sensor cable. So yeah, so we'll configure that later in the app. So the last step is to mount the last piece to mount is the hall sensor, and so the closer to the center of the axis of the reel, the better. There's less movement of the reel. It's just more accurate. So, and these brackets are meant to be bent so that you can kind of mount it wherever and easily mount it in place. And so I tend to find a spot that's easy to just wedge it between, and then bend the bracket, and then attach the sensor, the magnetic sensor, and then mount it. See? Bent bracket. So then you can see, I'm just gonna tighten this up. All right, cool, we're good to go. Ready to mount. So when you mount the magnetic sensor, you want it to be 1 inch away from the magnets when you mount them. And so it's hard to see here, but that's what I'm trying to do, is get it 1 inch away from the reel. So, great. So I drilled the holes, and now I'm going to tap them out. Just I found it a lot easier to drill and tap holes than it is to try and use like self-tapping screws, just especially with a lot of this tubing. It's quite thick. It's really easy for it to break screws off. So it really sucks to try and get, a hardened self-tapping screw out of a hole when it's broken. So drilling and tapping is a lot easier. Drill and tap both the holes. And then we've got some mounting hardware here, and then got washers, lock washers, and some screws. All right, so now magnetic sensor has been mounted. I've adjusted it to be about 1 inch away from the reel. And then now I need to connect the cable. It's also labeled with cable labels. So then we can connect this end to the sensor. So now I'm going to route the cable, and we'll clean all this up, all these other cables up at the end when we zip tie them in place. So next is mounting the magnets. So we want to place them evenly spaced around the reel. And as we can see on this Ocmus reel, that it's divided into 8 sections very, very nicely. So with this, we'll place 8 magnets. That's the minimum number that we need to place on the reel. And we provide up to like 16. So depending on your reel, you can place up to 16 magnets. I'm placing them, I guess, pointing out away from the axis. So they're longer, so that if you have any variability as the reel goes around, it's easier for the magnetic sensor to pick it up. So you don't have to be as accurate with the magnet placement if you put them the direction that I'm placing them, like this. Yeah, be careful. They're really, really sticky, and so they can be pretty easy to break. Yep, we're good. All right, magnets have been placed. So the last piece is cleaning up the cables. So I'm going around and just zip tying the cables in place. Just make sure they don't get caught on anything. Yeah, so I'm just coiling up the small, like the remaining cable, and just kind of zip tying it together to keep it organized. And then at the end, I'll just zip tie everything up together. So. We ended up rerouting the Hall sensor cable. We were afraid that the cable was going to get hit by this guy. So we rerouted it to the inside and then zip tied it all in place. And now I'm just coiling up all the spare slack from the Hall sensor cable. The last thing I want to do is just cut the tails off the zip ties, and then we're done. All right, and we're done.
Go!
Thanks.
Lens change.